Welcome to Safety Talk. Personal safety expert Pete Canavan shares his insights and interviews experts who provide simple and effective tips, techniques, and technologies to keep you safe and secure both online and off. Here's Pete.
Hello and welcome to Safety Talk. I am your host and personal safety expert, Pete Canavan, and I'm joined by my colleague, branding and social media expert, Neil Haley. How you doing tonight, Neil?
Hey, I'm doing great. Streaming Bosch right now. I have to bring up our one time we were trying to do some sort of a morning show together or kind of variety show, but I'm watching Bosch season 5, and it's really good. But I've streamed it really quickly, and I'm going to be really upset when the season's over, and we'll have to wait to season 6. But if you've not checked out Bosch on Amazon, check it out for sure. Love Titus and how they did. Unbelievable show. Unbelievable what Michael Conley's been able to do with this brand on Amazon. One of the longest lasting, I forget what the series right now, where the way they're doing it.
I've never watched it. I don't know anything about it, so you'll have to give me a little more detail later and see in my spare time if I get a chance to watch some of it, which I have very little of that these days. But so we'll get rocking and rolling here, but unfortunately I'm going to have to take it down a little bit of a notch here, start off light and whatnot. But, this past weekend was Easter Sunday, and a lot of celebrations around the world. But unfortunately, some very sad news, as I'm sure many people have seen, out of Sri Lanka this weekend, as coordinated attacks on 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels were carried out, and up to this time of this podcast here and this recording, we have learned that now 290 people have been killed and over 400 have been wounded. They've arrested 24 people so far, but as if that wasn't shocking enough and really something that really makes you sit back and go, what is going on, and how is this possible that people are perpetrating this sort of violence against, people who are peacefully celebrating a very, sacred holiday in several religions. But the equally shocking thing is that there was an intelligence memo that was circulated 10 days prior to the attacks that warned of a possible attack on Easter Sunday. And so that is so upsetting to me, because this needs to be examined. This needs to be looked at as to why additional preventative measures were not taken, why this warning was not apparently, taken seriously. It was apparently ignored. So very, very disturbing, and we're sure to find out a lot of different, takes on this. We're going to find out some other facts and information as the days and the weeks go by. But obviously, our hearts and minds go out to the families of the dead and the wounded. And, again, it's senseless violence. It continues to shock us. And, in every corner of the world, it appears that, is impacted by these events. So, last month we had a guest on who spoke in detail actually on this subject. And if you missed that episode, I encourage you to go listen to that episode with Bob Arramondo, who actually, as part of what he does and his security people, they actually protect synagogues in North Jersey. And he is a global security expert, global protection services expert. He's traveled all over the world. Very, very interesting episode. Now, today's guest, maybe I'll talk a little bit about this sort of thing, and so we're going to hear a little bit about that from her. Our guest today is an American sociobiologist and futurist. She is the preeminent global expert on the subject of, quote, fast adaptation, and she's also the recipient of the prestigious Edward O. Wilson Biodiversity Technology Award. Her career spans 4 decades. She's got a lot of experience. She's worked with founders and key executives and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. She's also worked with some major clients, some names you probably may have heard of, Hewlett-Packard, Apple, Oracle, GE, and many others. Now, she puts forward some very urgent and sophisticated ideas about civilizational collapse. And Rebecca Costa is our guest, and we will definitely get into some of this today. 2 years ago, she published a book called On the Verge, and in that book, she discusses the value of acting preeminently to prevent damage when we know a problem is imminent, just as we were talking about here, on both global scales as well as on personal levels. And, there's new data that shows that this is possible. So it sounds a little bit like Minority Report to me. So, and so with that, welcome to Safety Talk, Rebecca. Thanks for being on the show with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And, It's just, unfortunately, it's a really perfect time for us to have this discussion. This tragedy in Sri Lanka is just, we haven't even uncovered the tip of the iceberg at this particular point in time.
No, they're just starting to get details, but anything that can be done to improve safety is what we're all about here on Safety Talk on the show. And you've got some very interesting information about emerging tech and where you see society and the U.S. and global markets heading. And we're going to get into some of that. But I first wanted to get sort of your take on that awful news out of Sri Lanka that I just talked about. That, and if you had any sort of thoughts about that, personal, professional, before we get into any of our specific questions.
Well, we could easily occupy an entire program and then some on this particular topic, because the perpetrators and their actions are no longer unknown. And this is presenting a real dilemma for us in society. And we're not socially evolved enough to really deal with it. The fact is, it should come as no surprise to anyone listening that 24 hours and literally minutes after these horrendous acts are perpetrated, we know who the offenders are. And the problem, of course, is we're working backwards. As we begin to work backwards, we find that these intelligence memos, they existed, and the authorities failed to act. And we find that there was erratic behavior. The people bought weapons, and we start to trace and connect all these dots, and we say, wow, it was pretty inevitable. The example that I like to give, if you can, give me a little bit of time here, I'd like to use the example of Stephen Paddock.
Sure, no, absolutely. I mean, this is important, and this is something that is in everybody's minds, and I think everybody is kind of wondering, what can you do? Why weren't people alerted when there was this sort of breadcrumb?
But they were. This is the fact. They were alerted. We do know who is committing these acts. And when we work backwards, we start to put all of these dots together, and we know that they're going to act. The question is, what can we do when we know somebody with a great deal of certainty is going to commit an act? You mentioned the movie Minority Report. I have to keep reminding people that read my books that Minority Report wasn't a documentary, because the fact is that we do have that capability today. And I'll give you an example. I like to use Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter, as an example, because within 24 hours, as we began to work backwards after he had shot into those concert goers in Las Vegas, we had discovered that he had bought 42 firearms, and mostly escalated in a couple of weeks before he committed that terrible act. His father was a dangerous sociopath. Now, as a scientist, I can tell you that's a heritable quality. And just about 90 days before he, went berserk, if I can use a scientific term, he was put on diazepam. Now, anybody who has a family history of dangerous sociopathy does not go on diazepam. So shame on the doctor who put him on diazepam. A couple of weeks before the shooting, he sent his significant other to another country and sent his money there. His gambling behavior became very, very erratic. He lived in 27 residences leading up to the committing of the crime.
Wow.
A week before, he bought tracer rounds, which allowed him to shoot better and more accurately in the dark. He bought 1,600 rounds of ammunition. There were many, many, many clues that he was reaching a point of criticality. Now, sometimes people don't know what predictive analytics is. Predictive analytics are algorithms that allow us now, using artificial intelligence, to take billions, not thousands, not hundreds, billions of data points, and be able to assess with tremendous accuracy what your next action will be.
Wow.
And this is where we sit today. We sit today where just monitoring words you use in social media, there are danger words and there are happy words. And
Yeah.
just by simply monitoring your vocabulary on social media and in emails, we can determine which people are beginning to act in a way that is dangerous, whether
Now,
it's to
since that,
themselves, suicidal, or to others. And so we're getting to a point now where we are getting to minority report. It may be that we only are at 85. Let's just give us the benefit of the doubt and say we're at 85% accuracy. We know someone is going to do something. But you know how technology goes. We'll go from 80% or 85% to 86%, 87%, 88%.
sure, keep
And
getting
over
better.
time, with the advent of quantum computing and other tools, we're going to get very quickly to the 99.9 percentile that you are going to commit an act like we saw in Sri Lanka, and you tell me what we can do about it.
So that obviously brings us to the critical question of, can you sort of arrest somebody for a crime that you're pretty certain they're going to commit before they commit it? Now, I would say no.
In the minority report, we had thought police.
Right.
They came in and arrested you 1 second before you were going to commit the act.
Right. Which is, I mean,
But
it's
see, and
bizarre.
that there goes my conversation going back to Facebook. Now we're going to look at specific people. If when the first came out, okay, the alt-right's not allowed to have any part of this platform. Now it's defining into conservatism. So now we're going to say, if you're a Christian, you can't have this platform. So we're really dealing with a lot of things that you were saying in the minority report, and that fact. You're based on someone's speech, based on specific acts that they say on social media now are censored or you are considered unright based on your beliefs.
Now we can, I think it's our responsibility that once somebody like that has been identified, to not necessarily go out and arrest them right then and there, because there's been no crime committed. They may think about it. I mean, we all probably think about things that from time to time we're like, well, I wish I could, do so-and-so, knock this person out because they're driving me crazy, but we know we're not going to do it, but we can think of it. So the next, sort of, I guess, evolution of that would be, okay, so then we have to have some sort of responsibility to sort of step up the monitoring of these individuals that have been identified as, having a very high likelihood of committing some sort of atrocity.
But our entire legal system is based on after the fact.
Right.
You have to commit the act, and then we go and we get you, and then we try you, right? And then we try you again and again and again, it turns out, to get lots of chances that we don't convict the innocent, right? And then we go to the punitive stage. That is our entire judicial system. And the reason is because even after Stephen Paddock had done all those things, checked himself into the room in Las Vegas, right? Broken the window and pointed the gun at the concert goers, he could have had a change of heart. He could have put the gun down, sat down on the bed and said, I'm not going to do it. Packed up and gone home. And we believe in that. We believe in free will. We believe in redemption. We believe people can change their mind. But the reality is, computers are smarter than our belief. Computers can take billions of behavioral markers now, and activities and vocabulary and drugs that we're on and spending patterns, and look for erratic behaviors, and begin now with tremendous accuracy that we have never had before, and say within 99.9%, this person is going to act out in a violent way. We have those tools in technology. The question is, how are we going to use them?
Right. Because that's, you're now crossing that sort of line in, like you just mentioned, the judicial system is set up a certain way, innocent to proven guilty. You've got to be tried. You've got to commit the crime before you can actually be tried. And then, then it goes to all kinds of, then the lawyers get involved, and, the jury gets involved, and you have all of these people now that are making decisions based on something that you did, and as to why you did it and what influenced you to do it. And, were you in the right state of mind before you did it? And, all of these different things come into play. So it's a really...
We don't have the legal means. We don't have the legal tools to stop someone. People listening should understand. We don't have preventive tools. They don't exist in the legal system.
Do you want those preventive tools?
I think it's really scary.
Yeah.
Because when you start to think about punishing someone for something that artificial intelligence has dictated has a 99.99% probability of occurring, you have to abandon free will. You have to abandon the idea that someone could make a snap decision at the 11th hour and not commit the act. On the other hand, to move forward as we are today and allow 290 innocent people to die unnecessarily,
it's a very sad state.
That's not the right answer either.
No.
I mean, I think everybody listening would agree that's not the right answer.
No,
but to take
absolutely
away
not.
people's liberty is not the right answer either. So this is what I mean. This is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation. We have to talk about this because technology is moving forward. It's not as though this, you could say, well, I don't like that. Doesn't matter if you like technology or not. Doesn't matter if you think it's right or wrong. We have the tools. We can stop these things. We don't have the legal tools. And we don't really know how that will work.
No, not at all. So as I looked over your books, Rebecca, and you've got a few of them there, my impression is that when you look at the data and you look and you see like not just where America's heading, but where other countries are heading, whether it's what happened in Australia or New Zealand, whether what's happened in Sri Lanka, whatever, the things that have happened in Las Vegas and in other places all over the world all the time. You're worried, I'm worried, Neil's worried, we're all worried that we're repeating the same mistakes that have been made in the past, by, for example, like by prior civilizations, as you talk about.
Yes, and we're responding in a really prehistoric way. We're going, okay, well, if we just get rid of the guns.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, you can get rid of all the metal-based guns, but you can download a 3D printing, schematic and print your own plastic gun.
Right. There will always be ways that people will find, some method of carrying out what they want to do. And I agree. I mean, just, banning guns, doing, so if you ban guns, they're going to go to knives. If you ban knives, they're going to go to screwdrivers. You ban screwdrivers, it's going to be a pen. I mean, I'm a martial artist. I've been studying martial arts for over 20 some years now. You know how many different ways I know how to kill somebody using just about anything at my disposal? It doesn't have to be a gun.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I mean, ordinary fertilizer can be turned into a bomb.
Right. There's so many ways to do it. So
you can't kill every inevitability. And the fact is that getting rid of, guns isn't going to help you when you can just print a 3D printed gun that's plastic and do damage. I mean, it just, we're not addressing the real issue. The real issue has to do with civil liberties and how we want to live, what kind of society we want to be when we actually know who the perpetrators are. Do you know that by age 4 or 5, we can predict which children are likely to become sociopaths? We have these tools.
Well, my wife is a second grade teacher. And she tells me from time to time that there are kids in her class, and she knows that kid has the potential to grow up to be somebody not real nice.
A violent sociopath. Yes, and we can subject them to a battery of tests today, and we can predict in very high percentiles, in the 90s, in terms of percentile, that those children are going to be violent sociopaths if they grow up. Now, if you're a parent, do you want that information? And then even if you got that information, what would you do with it?
Yeah, if you're a responsible parent, you're going to try to do everything you can.
By the way, we have no cure for sociopaths. We don't have a cure for that. So what do you do if your child has been diagnosed that way?
Well, you do what you can as a parent, and if you're a responsible, loving parent, you're going to try to smother that child with love and attention and get them to hopefully go down the course and the live the life of a responsible person who ends up being someone who contributes to society. Is there any guarantee of
But
that?
that's
No.
not going to do anything. But that's not going to do anything for genetic heritability. Genetic heritability is going to be 50% or more of it. You can't love that away.
So what is genetic heritability?
These are the harsh reality. These are the harsh realities that we're not coming to terms with. We're not drilling down to what is real and what is truthful and what we can fix.
Explain to our listeners what genetic heritability is.
That means that is embedded in your DNA, just like your predisposition to get colon cancer or to have heart disease or breast cancer.
Okay.
When you're born into this world, you're born with at the genetic level, you're born for certain personality traits.
So
if you had one or two parents that were violent sociopaths, that can be inherited. The predisposition doesn't mean you will.
Right.
But, just like if you're predisposed to colon cancer or lung cancer, doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it means that you have a much higher probability.
So is that where should genetic screening now play a role in that, where if your genetic code prior to birth comes back and says, you know what, there is something in this this fetus's genetic code that says there's going to be a likelihood that they are going to be predisposed to being a violent sociopath, then what is, then what can you do about it? I mean, then the parents can say, well, is there a way that we can tweak that? And now you start kind of playing God with genetics. Do you now make a decision based on that information as to whether or not you want to, keep the baby? Do you make the decision to keep the baby and then realize that you've got to watch them more carefully? I mean, you start, it opens up so many different sorts of questions when you start to go down this road as we are.
And they are uncomfortable questions. They are difficult questions. They do not have easy answers. But I am a scientist by training, and I will tell you that I see no benefit in denying that we don't have those genetic tools, that we don't have the artificial intelligence algorithms to be able to identify and know. We may not know where people are going to carry out events, but I promise you we know who and we know when.
Wow. That's
we know who and we know when. And as you watch this Sri Lanka situation unfold, every day, I promise everyone listening to this broadcast, every single day, 4 or 5 new data points are going to emerge. Not just this intelligence report, but as we work backwards, they're going to say, well, then they bought this, and then they did this, and they moved here. And then they're going to look at their immigration visas, and they're going to look at the activities prior to. And they're going to start stringing a bunch of things together, just like Stephen Paddock. And pretty soon, if you keep track, if you just write down every new piece of data that comes out, you're going to see just you alone will have hundreds of data points, and you'll be asking yourself, why didn't they do anything? And my answer will be, what could they do?
I don't know.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is, well, can we predict based on being a scientist, can we predict what people's behavior is going to be?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Is it guaranteed as a behavioralist? Is that a guarantee?
No.
So if I know,
there is always room for someone to change their mind.
Right. Change their mind or be reformed just because you're in this realm of this personality. Or what do you think the opposite of your thinking that are behaviorists want to do? They want to identify people and put them in a track, and then that track stays for the rest of their lives.
And that's wrong. That's wrong by any measure, because it denies the great human potential.
Okay. Yeah, but
we have to deal with it because at no time in human history did we have the ability to look ahead and be able to predict with such precision and accuracy. Let me just give listeners a very simple example, which will help them to really understand how accurate we are. Right now, we can predict that you're going to trip and fall within the next 3 weeks with about an 86 to 90% accuracy. Now, when I say that to people, they go, that's impossible. You can't know I'm going to trip. And I say, well, yes, I can with almost up to a 90% accuracy. I can, and I know what's going to happen in a 3 week time window. And they go, you can't know that. And I said, yes, well, because we have identified that there is a 3 to 5 centimeter change in your normal walking gait. Your normal everyday walking gait changes 3 to 5 centimeters. And if that occurs, there is an 86 to 90% chance you're going to trip and fall. Now, that doesn't probably mean anything to a young person, but think of the elderly who lose their ability to live independently because they take a bad fall and they break their hip or their leg, and then suddenly they're in assisted living and it's downhill from there. So imagine the impact of within an 86 to 90% probability being able to put a little Fitbit-like thing on your ankle and say, hey, your normal walking gait is changed within 3 to 5 centimeters. Get into physical therapy, start using a cane. It pings their caretaker or their family and says, you know, your mom or dad is in danger of taking a fall within a 3-week period of time. They need to correct their walking gait. If you correct the walking gait, the danger goes away. This is where we are in life today. This is what technology can do. And so, you know, and you can look this up. Anything I'm talking about right now, you can just go on YouTube or go on the internet and verify all of these things, right?
Well, when we were at the security show, I was just going to say at the security show last week, they had a camera that analyzed the person's gait. So because it's as unique to you basically as like your fingerprint, everybody walks a certain way. And these cameras were doing that as people were walking by because, as you said, the technology to do that already exists. And so I can see the benefit of having something like that where you're monitoring a change in the way somebody is moving or walking, especially an elderly person where they're, you know, the ramifications from them taking a fall could be a lot worse than, you know, a 5-year-old or an 18-year-old, for example. So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And imagine having those cameras all throughout a person's house and being able to ping your cell phone and say, hey, your walking gait has changed. You're in danger of taking a fall. Get in and have it fixed in physical therapy. I mean, it sounds wild, but it's real.
Oh no, the technology exists, and being able to use it in a practical sense to keep people safer is obviously something that's going to garner a lot of interest from a lot of people, you know, from the medical industry, from insurance companies, and, you know, as well as obviously the people that could be affected by that. So I'd like to kind of move on with some of the other things that we have down here to talk about here, because time's flying. We got some great information that we're talking about here, Rebecca. We're looking at these problems that are happening in the world. And, you know, I think you would agree that these trajectories are very disturbing. They're precarious. There are, you know, a lot of very, you know, bad things that we're seeing happen all the time. You have a book called The Watchmen's and Rattle, I think it's called The Watchmen's Rattle. And
yes,
there's something that you talk about called the cognitive threshold. And I'd like to get into that a little bit because it's very interesting. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Well, when I wrote that book, I did not know, obviously I wrote it 6 or 7 years ago, and I did not know that the world events were going to unfold the way they are. People think I have a crystal ball. I did not. But I'm a data wonk, and I take data, and when you know what the first 1,000 data points are, it's not that hard to predict what 1,001 is going to be.
Right.
Right. And so for me, in collecting data, I was able to see a pattern that occurred in previous societies. I studied the Mayans, the Ming, the Egyptian Empire, the Khmer Empire, and I became very interested in what was their behavior prior to their collapse. By collapse, I don't mean everyone died. I just mean all their social systems collapsed. And I wasn't interested in what historians typically write about, which is whatever cataclysmic event, sent them over the edge. I think that those have been studied well enough. I was just interested in if they were acting in any particular way that made them vulnerable to that cataclysmic event. And lo and behold, as I began studying all these societies, I noticed that there was a common denominator, and that common denominator is that day-to-day life became too complex for the citizens to understand, and also for the leaders to actually understand. And as the complexity started to grow in their society, there became a mass confusion between what was an empirical fact and what was an unproven belief. And once that occurred, public policy began being based on unproven beliefs and not on empirical facts. And so a lot of people go, well, if those are the three steps, complexity outgrows what people can actually, what their brains were evolved to actually be able to understand. And then they switch over to unproven beliefs and ignore empirical fact. And then public policy is based on unproven beliefs. And then the society is basically set up for collapse. Do you think that's happening to us now? And my answer is yes.
I was just going to say, it sounds like what's happening today. I mean, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, because we have leaders who have never taken a physics course that have to make decisions about nuclear energy.
Right.
They're all lawyers that are making decisions, right, in Washington, not scientists. That you've got like what, 4 or 5 doctors out of hundreds that are making decisions on healthcare. What do they know?
Right. Or
They've
they have
never had a
advisors.
med class. They've never worked in a hospital. So I mean, the problem is that very, very complex issues are being determined based on beliefs and these days politics, not based on empirical fact. And so we could kind of see that policy is becoming increasingly irrational and doesn't make any empirical sense. And as a scientist, I can tell you that my blood pressure goes up if we start talking about politics, because I'm a rational human being. If you show me the data, that's how I make my decision.
Well, I can
In
tell
the
you're
absence
very,
of data,
I can
anybody
tell you're
can
very,
have any opinion.
You're very passionate about your topic and the information, because it's something that's very important. So what evidence do you see of this cognitive threshold being sort of, we're hitting up against it now in modern society today?
Well, I'll give you a couple examples. One, our brains are designed to understand barter. Okay, that's how we've evolved. Our brains are not substantially, haven't changed over the last couple of million years. Not a lot. Our frontal cortex has grown to occupy about 1/3 of our brain, and that's sort of the CEO that thinks rationally. But in reality, social progress has become way more complicated, right? And so you can look at Wall Street and look at the financial instruments. We have derivatives and all of these credit default swaps and all these instruments that even the experts on Wall Street can't explain to you.
Oh,
they don't know how they
so
work.
Many of them. Yep, makes very complicated.
We don't even know how currency is valued, because it's not tied to gold or silver. It's just a political football.
Yep.
And we don't know how currency is valued. We don't really understand how financial systems work anymore. This is a truth, and even the experts don't understand it. And
and it's so
what
out of whack
happens is
today. It's so
Donald
out of
Trump,
whack too.
Yeah, Donald Trump puts out a tweet, and all of a sudden the stock market takes a dive off of a tweet.
It's crazy.
That's about as irrational as you can possibly get. So these wild swings do not bode well. What our brains do understand is you and I meet in the middle of the road. I have some carrots, you have some eggs. We bicker till we both think that we got the better of the other guy. We exchange goods and we walk away happy. That's what our brains can handle. And when we experience, and I say when, not if, when we experience a unilateral financial collapse, what collapse means is not that people will die or there'll be chaos in the streets. It simply means that social systems reverse to what the brain has evolved to be able to understand and manage logically and rationally.
So what
Social
do you
systems
see that?
return to what we are capable of doing.
So what do you see that looking like, specifically in the United States, and then you could also expand upon that globally. But what does that collapse look like in your eyes?
Money will be worth nothing.
Right. So
It'll be worth
revert
nothing.
back to the barter system.
We're back to bartering like you do in flea markets. People, neighborhoods will come together, and we will start the process again. We will start the climb again. This is the story of modern man. We collapse our systems when they become too complex, too burdensome. Nobody can control them or understand them. I use in my book the example of the Mayans. They were phenomenal hydraulic engineers. They knew that they had a tenuous relationship with water. If they didn't conserve water, do crop rotation,
when do you expect this to happen? What is your prediction about when we're going to start seeing the downfall of our country?
I would say within, as you start to see more and more swings, right, and more erratic behavior, we're getting closer. So my guess would be that we're within a decade of unilateral financial collapse. That shouldn't scare anyone. I don't mean to, I'm not a fear monger. That should not scare anyone. It's not going to mean you're going to starve or people are going to hold you up in the street with guns. Yeah.
If you look at what's happened, though, I mean, look at what happened during the last, quote, financial collapse. The government stepped in. They bailed out all the banks that they said were, quote, too big to fail. Well, those banks now are 3 times the size. So if they were too big to fail before, and you look at where they are today, and there's a problem, there is no way they're going to be able to be bailed out. And so that whole system is going to collapse.
There's no more bailing out.
Oh, there is not.
No, there's no more bailing out. And all of our financial systems, it was better before World War II. I write about this in my book when we had diversity. Diversity is a hedge against unilateral collapse.
Yes.
Right? The German systems were different. The more centralization you get and the more enmeshment you get, the worse it gets, because then you all fall like dominoes. I was against the European Union. I was against the Euro. I was one of only a few scientists who said this is a very bad idea because all it's going to take is one country, right, not reporting according to standard accounting practices, and it's going to take all the countries down. And that country was Greece.
Yep.
And the minute the EU started bailing out Greece and Italy, it was game over. And now you've got Brexit, which is a holy mess. And actually, it would be much more stable if every country in Europe had their own currency. It worked independently, because diversification is stability.
Yes.
That is stability. And the less of it we have, the more danger there is of unilateral collapse. This is why I'm saying that there's some chance that we separate from each other's economies, right? And we move away from this interdependent economy. There's some chance of that, but we'd have to do it rather quickly.
But then
I'm not sure we can.
And the flip side of it is you have these other powers that are trying to create a one world economy and a one world currency. And they believe that globalization and centralization of governments and banks and currencies and control is the way to go. And that is the absolute worst thing to do, because now you've got one system and there is no more diversification. There is no independence. And that's an extremely dangerous thing. And I was also someone that said that the EU forming and everybody getting rid of their own currencies and going to a single currency was crazy, because all of those markets are completely different. And if one market goes up or down, they all go up or down, and it screws it all up.
Take a lesson from nature. I started out as a sociobiologist before I landed in Silicon Valley in the late 70s and spent my career there working with amazing geniuses and innovators. But let's take a page out of just evolution. The reason you have so many different types of dogs hunting dogs and chihuahuas and dogs like St. Bernards with thick coats that are big. And you have millions of types of fish and insects and varieties of bees and all of that, is so that when the environment changes, some will have what's required for that change and will thrive, and others will die off. This is the way nature works. There's lots of diversity so that certain species can survive.
Sure.
And will continue to perpetuate. And we can see that in nature, and nature is our playbook. Ultimately, the only patterns we have for success that have the longest standing successful record is nature itself. So we can look there and we can say, wow, when there's a lot of diversity, as the environment changes, some will survive, some won't, many won't make it. This is what I mean about diversity in economies. As the environment changes, as we move to cryptocurrency or whatever else comes along our way, as the internet, explodes, there'll be something else that disrupts us, like the internet has disrupted commerce. There'll be something else around the next corner. And as that happens, we need some economies to be able to adapt, and some will fail. That's
so. What are we to do?
That's the way it's supposed to be.
What are we to do with this forecast you're giving us? What can we do to slow this down?
Well, I tell people the days of adaptation are over. You must pre-dapt. You must look further down the road, because the great gift you have, the great gift your brain has, is the ability to do thought experiments, look at data, process it objectively, and see what is down the road in the future, and then take some action today to minimize the negative outcomes to you. So you can't wait until danger is upon you anymore. This gets back to the Sri Lanka. It gets back to the economic collapse. You'd be a fool. These are like large ocean liners. You have to start the turn now. You must prepare for an economic collapse, and the fact that you must take care of you and your family for a period of time, just like you take precautions for earthquake or fire,
sure,
or a hurricane. You need to take precautions now.
As I say, the time to prepare is before the need arises.
And that's pre-adaptation. That's right. You're pre-adapting. You're adapting before the event has occurred.
So you describe yourself as a futurist. Okay, so we're talking about the future. And it's always fun, sometimes a little scary, to think about the future and to sort of make, predictions about what we think is going to happen. Now, if we were to try to have a sustainable civilization and a planet that thrives, and there's something that you were talking about where a type 1 civilization, which basically is a sustainable planetary civilization that's, powered by the sun. And the data says we've got maybe 100 years or so to come up with this sort of, better way of doing things, or in the next 100 years or so, it'll be too late. So what chance do you think, and what do we have to do for us to get to that point where we can be sustainable, that we can get beyond that 100 years mark, that we can flourish as we go down this path, not decades from now, but 100, 200, 100 years from now?
We need to be a data-reliant society. We need to stop falling prey to charismatic leaders and prehistoric emotions, tribal emotions, which are causing us to make very, very dangerous decisions. Ed Wilson put it the best. I've never heard anyone say it more efficiently. He said, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
That is perfectly put.
That is our situation. Yeah, that is our situation right now. Our institutions are medieval, and they've fallen far, far, far behind technology.
So
our emotions are Paleolithic, so we go into tribal warfare when we should be looking at the data and taking advantage of these wonderful, godlike technologies that would allow us to head off danger,
so
that would allow us not to suffer.
President Trump. Let's go right to the topic of President Trump as a behavioralist. Is this good for the country or bad for the country?
I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Ah, see, there you go. See, I knew I'd ask a question you wouldn't answer.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
Well, you know what it takes.
You're not gonna throw me in that berry patch.
Okay,
but I mean, but you believe that if people feel unsafe, it's a bad situation for the environment in general.
I believe that we're in a messy period right now, and that as artificial intelligence becomes more and more part of our everyday life, we ask Alexa a question, and when Alexa answers us, we believe her more than we believe our spouse.
Which is,
I mean, how many times in the middle of an argument do you yell out Alexa, or do you grab your phone and say, I'm going to Google that? I think you're wrong.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, a lot of people. Technology is right at our fingertips.
Right.
Get the answers that we need.
And that's rightly so, because computers don't, and you can't, by the way, when people go, well, what if somebody maniacal manipulates artificial intelligence? You can't, because artificial intelligence is looking at billions and billions of data points. And if you try to manipulate one, it just throws it out.
And it's looking at it without emotion. So it's looking at it as a...
Right, there's no emotion. It's only looking at the data. The question is whether society can accept the data, is prepared to act on the data, right? It's prepared to transform those medieval institutions to accommodate data that will make it a better world, that will save our world. So people get really out of joints when I tell them I trust artificial intelligence more than I trust any human being.
Well, and I know you didn't want to say anything about Trump, but let's go to the media, because I'm sure you have something to say about the role that the media plays in all of this. And it's not all good, not all bad. It's somewhere, I guess. Well, I'm not even going to go there. I want to get your kind of take, but let's talk about that for a little bit. The role that the media plays in all this, because we've got everything in the news focuses on the sensational, the bad news, the things that are going to sell the newspapers, and it doesn't focus on the solutions. It doesn't focus on the positive. And so that's, what's your take on the role of the media in all of this and how they can sort of help?
Look, the media is not some, church that's doing nonprofit work. The media exists to sell advertising, to make money. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of the media. And the more eyeballs and ears you have, the more you can charge for advertising, the more profit that you make. So it used to be in my, I'm old enough to remember when news bureaus didn't have anything to do with advertising, but now they're all rolled into programming.
Yep.
And so there's no firewall between news and the Housewives of Beverly Hills. It's all the same stuff. How many eyeballs can you get, and what can you charge for advertising? So we shouldn't be under any delusion that somehow news stands above any other programming. It really and truly does not. And again, to the extent that they appeal to our Paleolithic emotions, they get our blood pressure up. They appeal to our voyeurism. They appeal to excitement such as pornography. To the extent that they appeal to our lower animal instincts, they get more viewers. But it's a cheap shot. We're better than that.
But so is there any way that you see the news media being able to change? Can the news media change and give us more real news as opposed to fake news or untold news or sensationalist, news stories or news that's ignored?
Okay, so Pete, I'm going to feel really optimistic about the media when your podcasts get as many viewers as the Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Yeah, I'd be pretty optimistic too.
I listen. Okay. I interview them because celebrity sells, and I know for a fact.
Okay, I'm gonna feel really good about the media when that happens.
I hear you.
But it never will. It's all about sensationalism. It's all about specific things. And now, as I said, right. but Facebook doing this is going to ruin a lot of the conversations that are online of why so many people go to Facebook, because they want to go and debate. They want to have a dialogue and get fired up. If you censor things, Facebook's making a big mistake, because that's what makes the media so great, is the controversy.
Yeah, but you know what? They do censor a lot of it.
Are we, we have to look at the programming and understand, are we appealing to the emotions that we share with the lower animals, or are we appealing to our higher selves? Look,
We're
there's
definitely not
millions and
appealing to our
millions of
higher selves.
species.
Anytime you put on the TV, it's just mostly garbage. I mean, there's
Okay,
so much
so
bad stuff. We're appealing to the lower end, undoubtedly. Like you said, those animalistic, emotions that sell because we want, to feel those emotions, whether it's anger or love or lust or action or, horror or, any of those real primitive emotions, because that's what sells. That's what people want to watch. That's what they want to hear, because I think a lot of it has to do with them escaping from reality and the fact that they don't want to have to think, and they don't want to use those higher cognitive functions like we're doing on this show, where you're making people think. You're talking about real solutions and real problems and ways that we can make a difference if we could only harness the power of this technology in the right way. And until the majority of people also feel that way, it's a real tough uphill battle to do that.
it is, but think of it this way, right? After 3.5 million years, human beings have climbed to the very top of the living pyramid. We're it.
As far as we know.
And yeah. As far as we know, we're it. And as a sociobiologist and evolutionary biologist, I'm so disappointed. I'm just disappointed. I'm not angry. I'm not aiming anything at Trump or any individual person. I'm just disappointed. It took millions of years to develop a frontal cortex. We can perform thought experiments about the future better than any other organism on this planet. And we know we can make a connection between something we're doing today and what that consequence might be 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And we've invented technology that will even tell us hundreds of years down the road what the repercussions of our actions are. And yet we're acting like the lower animals that don't have those tools. And I will tell you, I am a futurist. So I live 1 million years from now, and I look back to today. I do. I look back to today, and we're going to look worse than the Neanderthals, because the Neanderthals had an excuse. They didn't have tools that could do this. They didn't have solutions that could prevent tragedy like climate change. So they weren't able to do anything. But we're going to look back at this time in human history and say, what was wrong with those guys?
I'm sure that's what they're going to say about us. Oh, I'm sure of it. So do you have any last thoughts for our listeners, or any final messages that you'd like to sort of put out there for those of us that are trying to build a better world and a better future?
Yes. Rely on data. Don't rely on your lower instincts, and don't follow leaders that whip up your emotions, because that's not going to be helpful. What we need to do is step away from those Paleolithic emotions and rely on technology to help us forge a better future, because the technology is available and it is out there. And everyone listening can help spread the word by spreading this podcast. Link people that you don't even think would listen to this podcast, link them to it. Because I think that the more people that listen to this kind of dialogue and understand what we're up against, the better chance we have.
Amen to that. I agree with you 100%. So if people are interested in learning more about you, obviously they can listen to this podcast. But if they want to find out about you and your books and services, Rebecca, where can our listeners go to find out more?
They can go to RebeccaCosta.com. That's RebeccaCosta.com, myname.com. It's easy to remember. And we have a really fully loaded website where you get information on books, sign up for our newsletter, and also watch a number of YouTube videos.
Excellent. We'll make sure that we put those links out there when we put this out through social media. And I want to thank you very much, Rebecca, for coming on to Safety Talk, and thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Hope it provokes some serious thought in people after listening to today's guest. And in the meantime, to get any more information or to get the latest news, you can always go to safetytalkpodcast.com for more information and to listen to prior episodes. So Neil, any last thoughts?
No other thoughts except we have to really wake up in specific ways, and great conversation, great dialogue to think about for sure.
Absolutely. So, Rebecca, thanks again.
Thank you. And
And,
thank you for the work you are both doing. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, absolutely. So,
No problem.
until next time, everybody, stay safe.